My name is Cameron Collins. I am a revenue operations strategist with Rev Partners, community manager with Sprocketeer. We've got my co-host, Mark Lerner, director of growth marketing, as he just said, with Deal Hub. And our guest today, Max Cohen, who is the chief evangelist at Hapily.
Dude,
So,
Cameron,
Max, if you will, give
yeah,
everyone your intro
I'll
and
give
answer
it. It was so funny is that what you said, who got the evangelist role first? Was it me or KJ? My wife's name is Crystal Jean Cohen, and we call her KJ. And when you said KJ, I was like, what are you talking? Wait, what? And then Kyle Jepson. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, so Kyle got that product evangelist or HubSpot Academy evangelist role, I think before I left HubSpot to go to Happily, I would think. So I think in the HubSpot world, he may have taken that mantle before I did, because he's been doing the sprocket, no, not the tips and tricks thing for a while, which kind of surmounted his or led to his rise to LinkedIn
Stardom.
love. Yes, to LinkedIn stardom, as he put it. Whereas I just made a bunch of unhinged TikToks and got in trouble for it a whole ton. Anyway, so yeah, hey everybody watching. My name is Max Cohen. I am the chief evangelist over at Happily. If you don't know what Happily is, we basically just build a bunch of dope apps for HubSpot, right? The way to frame that up is when you look at a lot of what's in the HubSpot app marketplace, especially in years past, most of the stuff that you see on there is generally integrations between HubSpot and other tools. But a lot of the stuff that we build are apps that just add net new functionality into HubSpot that you wouldn't really use if you didn't have HubSpot. So we focus on building apps on the HubSpot app marketplace. We don't do like custom app development or anything like that, like one-off projects. It's all just app store or app marketplace focused stuff that we're building. We've got a bunch of different apps you may have heard of, such as Associate and Zebra, which I'm sure we'll mention Zebra today as we're talking through the topic that we're going through. But yeah, my role at Happily is under the doing the chief evangelism stuff. It's a whole bunch of things. It's content, it's relationship with HubSpotters, helping them figure out how to get their customers out of sticky situations and sell more HubSpot because of our apps. But then I'm also running like our partner program over here and doing a lot of content. So my job is to be all over the place, be in the community, talking about the stuff that we're doing, but also just doing whatever I can to be another voice in the community, moving HubSpot forward in any way that we can help, because that's ultimately our mission here, right? Is we want to build apps that are going to help people do more with HubSpot and do it better. And that's our whole shtick over here. Before I was at Happily, I spent 7.5 years at HubSpot. I did everything from customer onboarding. So back before it was customer onboarding specialist, it was called implementation specialist. So I did that for the first 2.5 years. I onboarded like in the ballpark of 200 to 300 direct-ish customers, I think, if my math is correct. It certainly feels like a lot more, because back in the day, you had anywhere from like 30 to 60 customers at a time doing 90-day marketing hub onboardings. And then the CRM came into it, and it was an intense part of my life. A lot of back-to-back 10 call a day days over there. Did that. I ran the new hire training program for 3.5 years, onboarded over 1,500 new HubSpotters to HubSpot. Got to be like a really cool part of the beginning of their journey, which was super fun. And then I spent the last 2 years as a solutions engineer on HubSpot's mid-market sales team. So yeah, I know HubSpot better than I know myself, and I love talking about it. And I'm stoked to come hang out with you guys. And
Mark, I was telling Max just before we all hopped on earlier that this is a very full circle episode, because our very first episode with a guest, which was our third episode that we did, was with Rob Jones. And you may recall we'd asked Rob, where do you get a lot of your inspiration from for your content in the space? And his answer was Max. So this is a very special episode for us to be doing. And I think it shows how far we've come from not even being able to go live on LinkedIn.
Oh, we've come so far.
Now we're able to go live and fill people's brains with knowledge, which is really what we're here to do. Make sure that we provide helpful HubSpot content. Max, when we were messaging and trying to figure out what type of theme we wanted for the show, and you sent something to the effect of, I'm very bored with people using subscription data for MRR.
Yes.
And my mind broke when I heard that, because that's like the thing that everybody does is you close a deal and then everyone wants to report on it. And like, where do we go from here is very seldom a question that people ask. So give the 1,000-foot overview on where we go from there.
Yeah, I'll tell you why it's like really, I know you said grind my gears, but let's say like HubSpot version, we could say what really rubs my hubs, or I was thinking of ones earlier, what really shish kebabs my sprockets these days. I don't know. I was literally trying to write a list earlier of HubSpot ways to say
that sounds like
flexing the flywheel.
Yeah, flex my flywheel.
It's flexing your flywheel right now.
Yeah, there's more expletive ways to do that one too. But anyway, so yeah, like the whole MRR conversation. This is something that like I watched for like years at HubSpot, and I watched HubSpot like struggle to figure out how it was going to like address this reporting on MRR like inside of HubSpot question for a long time. Because again, back when I joined HubSpot, the CRM had literally just came out, right? And HubSpot was still very much like a marketing only tool. It's a very marketing forward platform, and it reinvented itself into a CRM and then like a customer platform during my tenure there, right? But the MRR conversation was always so interesting because obviously as the CRMs developed, you had more teams going in there and actually selling, right, out of HubSpot CRM. Whereas like when it first started, the meta was like you had a HubSpot marketing, Salesforce CRM, and then you had a WordPress website, right? Now people are running all of that stuff on HubSpot. And there's a lot of people that sell products that are on subscriptions, right? Especially if like you're a SaaS company or you're a coaching company or like literally any sort of company that relies on monthly recurring revenue in any way, shape, or form, right? And the question that we got always, whether I was an implementation specialist or I had new hires asking about it, and like during training, or when I was a solutions engineer, like recently, right? There was always this sort of stigma of fear around the conversation of like, how does HubSpot report on monthly recurring revenue, right? And it was always really tough because HubSpot gained this weird reputation over the years that like HubSpot's reporting sucks for monthly recurring revenue, right? And the problem is that it's not that HubSpot's reporting tools were bad. It's that the data was never structured in a way to make it appropriate to report on monthly recurring revenue, right? And they made attempts to try to fix this, right? I don't know if anyone remembers the recurring revenue feature that was in Sales Hub Enterprise, I think, that unlocked 4 different strange properties on the deal record that you had to update in different ways, and then use this one report that showed what your MRR was, but you couldn't really do anything custom to it. It's very locked up. The big problem that kind of HubSpot suffered with for a long time is that the idea of a subscription, which is the formal way of saying someone's paying us the same amount of money every month, right? The idea of a subscription was never getting decoupled from either like a contact or a company or a deal. And if you think about it, a contact is not a subscription that it owns. A company is not a subscription that it owns. A deal is not the subscription that came from it. We're talking about completely different entities, right? So what that would mean is you would run into all these like crazy, ridiculous problems trying to use properties of this object that was not representing the actual object that you were trying to report on. So people would put like an MRR field in deals, or like a current MRR field on a company record, or an MRR field on a contact, when MRR is not an attribute of any of those things. It's an attribute of a completely separate object being a subscription. Now, HubSpot solved this problem a little bit not a little bit. I'd say they solved it by creating HubSpot payments and creating that subscription object, right? And the reason that was really important is because they detached this idea of what a subscription is from the things that it's associated to, and it became its own entity. And that is where you can then start to do things like proper monthly recurring revenue, because a subscription is its own thing. A subscription has its own monthly recurring revenue. It has its own billing cycle. It has its own products that you're paying for, right? And those can be associated to the entities that bought it, the entity that sold it, being like the deal, the company, right? Because you can sell multiple subscriptions on a deal. A company can own multiple subscriptions to something. You could have 2 or 3 Netflix accounts, depending on who you're paying for it for, right? So subscriptions are their own entity, and that's a really important thing. Now, the reason I'm talking about this so much is because Hapily makes a product called Zebra, right? And what Zebra is, for folks who don't know, is it's a way to connect your Stripe data into HubSpot, right? At a very base level, it does a lot of different things and it adds a lot of functionality into HubSpot. But for me, the HubSpot nerd, the coolest thing it does is it brings that subscription data into HubSpot as its own object, kind of like how HubSpot payments represents subscriptions as their own object. Now, the reason I'm getting so fired up about all these other use cases is because up until I'd say recently, the big reason why people wanted this data inside of HubSpot is almost always to be able to report on monthly recurring revenue in HubSpot when Stripe is like their central record of truth for their subscriptions, right? So it's great. You could bring in your subscription information from Stripe into HubSpot and it'll show up as like custom objects, or if you don't have HubSpot Enterprise, you'll see it as a separate deal pipeline, right? It's still its own entity though, however, right? And it's great. And like you could report on your MRR and that's cool. But dude, there's so many different things that you can do with that data and like people aren't thinking about it. And that's why I'm super fired up about it. And I'm making it my mission to really make sure people can understand how you could take this very simple data. We're talking about one object and maybe 3 to 4 key properties on it and do a ton all over HubSpot, not just in like certain places. Because I think sometimes people go, oh yeah, this is great for sales because they're selling subscriptions. No, subscription data touches every single part of your flywheel. It touches every single part of marketing, sales, and service, right? And there's a lot of really cool ways to use this data. Whether you're bringing it in through Zebra, or you're doing it through HubSpot payments, or you have totally separate payment providers or like whatever, and you're bringing it all in through custom objects in some sort of really smart way through like the API, right? There's a lot of things you can do with that data, and that's what I want to talk about today. Sorry for the rant, but I think it's really important to frame it all up.
I guess you could say it's really flummoxed. You could say it's really flummoxed your flywheel, as we can clearly tell.
Yeah, yep.
As we can tell.
You should coach Little League or something, because I'm with you. Let's do it.
I coach competitive paintball, so it's like that. Except for instead of Little League, they're all just a bunch of idiots. Anyway, so yeah, that's where we're at. Where do you want to start?
So, yeah, Mark, you think we got enough content for the next 45 minutes?
I think so. Well, context for the audience. We always have a very long, like kind of not script, but outline of what we want to do, and we never able to cover it all. We always worry that we're not going to get a full hours amount. We never actually fully get everything we want, because we always find like unearth a new topic and go down a different rabbit hole, which is what I think is most exciting about this. I'm excited to see where this goes.
I'm stoked. And I don't have a hard stop either, so we can talk about this for the next 4 hours if you want to.
All right, everyone strap in, because we are going and I'm canceling my meetings for the day. Yeah, let's dive in with this, because one of the points you sent me was win backs. And this is one very specific thing that, from my perspective as a revenue operations strategist, where I am working with a multitude of partners of all different industries and touching all different points of the business, very rarely do I end up talking to stakeholders who have conversations proactively about win-backs. Let's start first. I'll let you go ahead and do it, but start by defining, okay, what is a win-back and why do we need to get them? And then let's talk about, okay, how do we use what we gain from the sale to achieve that?
Yeah, so pretty simple. So like when we think of a win-back campaign, like I'm like broadly categorizing any sort of like efforts that you take to take someone who's canceled and win back their business, right? Now, that looks very different when you have a human-led sales process, right? And humans are involved when someone actually cancels something, and then that's, a big issue, right? And generally people are involved and they know it's happening, and there's contract negotiations and things like that. But then there's also like plenty of companies that could be using HubSpot that their product or subscription is purchased touchlessly, right? Maybe there isn't a sales rep involved. Maybe it's some sort of service like an app or something like that, where you can get a subscription and then you can easily cancel it without even talking to anybody, right? So in those situations, it's really difficult to make sure the marketing that's starting in HubSpot is actually informed by that kind of stuff happening, right? So what's really cool about the subscription data, I'll talk about with Stripe, right? So Zebra brings in like this Stripe subscription object. We call it a Zebra subscription object. And there is a very, very useful, very simple free text field called subscription status. And that is updated from the Stripe subscription. And again, this sort of method could apply to however you're connecting subscription data into HubSpot, right? So if you're doing something custom with the API, you can follow this method and do the same thing. But that subscription status tells us a couple different things, right? Mostly where that subscription is living in its life cycle. So it could be anywhere from it's active, which means they're currently paying us, right? Keep this in mind for later when we talk about other parts of this. Past due, which means they're still like paying for it, but like they haven't paid for it. They missed a payment, right? So like they owe us money, but the subscription's still active. There's a few other subscription statuses, but another important one would be canceled. So the idea is like, how do we take the status of someone's subscription and make sure that we can inform the marketing automation that's triggering when someone cancels so we can immediately start that sort of win back effort that we're making? Whether that's like a series of compelling emails to try to get them to come back, maybe with a discount, maybe with a different offer or offering something at a lower tier or whatever it may be. Maybe that is triggering someone to reach out to them and start a more human approach. I'm going to leave it to everyone to experiment with what looks good from like a content perspective, right? But what usually is tough is getting that triggered in the first place, right? What's beautiful is you have that subscription data live feeding into your CRM. You have all the information there automatically of when that should be triggered. And there isn't any sort of wacky delay of saying, oh, we've got to go into Stripe or we've got to go into our other system, find out who actually canceled this month, and then take some time to import them and clean up the data and then get them on some sort of like email campaign where the timing is already screwed because maybe they canceled at the beginning of the month, but you're not actually starting that timely follow-up until the end of the month. Right. And all of a sudden it's like irrelevant to them. And I canceled this subscription. And a month later, they're saying, wait, we want you back. Being able to do that immediately and trigger what should be happening immediately when someone's canceled is if you have that subscription data in there, you can just build a workflow that just starts it right off of that one property changing. And what's even cooler is you can look at also the product that it was for, right? And change up the content, change up the strategy based on what works according to what they actually canceled. Because maybe they canceled one product, but not another, right? And you might follow up with someone obviously differently because the context of that cancellation is going to be different, right?
And so really to recap and encapsulate that, right, what we're talking about is making sure that if somebody terminates or intends to terminate a service, we notice that, we capture it, and then we have some type of follow-up, which marketing or service then get involved with to make sure, hey, let's get that business and get them back on board.
Yeah. Exactly. And again, a lot of it is just like the data's there. So all those things that should be automated are done in real time and there's no weird delay because you have to go somewhere else to find that trigger, right? To actually start those win back campaigns or get the context you need to deliver the right one to them. Yeah.
And I imagine in the context of subscription data, using that to supercharge all different angles of how do we generate more revenue. Yeah, that carries into upsells, right? So we talk about win back, we talk about MRR. Let's talk about upsells.
Yeah, totally.
Give us your take.
Yeah, same idea, right? And you can look at every business, I think, is going to look at upsells like a little bit differently, but there's the side of like how marketing is going to think about upsells and then how sales is going to think about upsells. And hopefully they're aligned in the way that they do that, right? But let's say you're in more of a touchless sales motion, right? There aren't salespeople getting on top of customers to like find more use and upgrade stuff, right? If you're in more of that touchless model and you're trying to get people to upgrade, right? A great starting point is literally just looking at when these subscriptions are getting created, right? So like you've got create date as one of the properties on a subscription object, right? That happens with Zebra automatically. But if it's ever a record being represented in HubSpot, no matter how you do it, all records have create dates, right? So that's one thing you can trigger time-based off of that. You can also then branch it out to deliver different campaigns based on the product that they have, right? So when you bring in that Stripe data, one of the products that they have shows up as a field, and then you'd be able to say, hey, if they are on, I don't know, Sprocket SaaS starter, right? and they just started that subscription, and we wait X amount of days to when we think it's appropriate, right, in order to be able to start some kind of campaign, right? You've got all that data to say, okay, I know that this person is an active customer. They've been using it for a little while. We want to start some sort of like upsell cycle to them through whatever promotion necessary, right? I don't want to just say email people all the time, but oftentimes that's what folks are doing, right? But they have that trigger. They know the people are current customers. They know exactly which product they're starting at, and then they can start to nurture them for an upgrade. Now, here's what's beautiful about this, right? When we start thinking of contact-based workflows, a cool thing that contact-based workflows can do is you can set goals for contact-based workflows, right? Since subscription data, at least when it's done through Zaber, but again, you could follow this method in a number of different ways, right? Like this applies to HubSpot payment subscriptions. This also would apply if you're doing it through the right way and modeling what Zaber does, right, through the API. If your subscriptions are associated to contacts, right, you could trigger these workflows through new subscriptions getting created through contact workflows, right? And we have triggers inside of Zaber to allow you to do that. But you can also set goals to stop those upsell campaigns if someone actually upgrades, right? And you could do that just by setting a goal in the workflow that a related subscription object is equal to whatever product you're trying to upgrade them to. And as long as your subscription data is getting updated in HubSpot with whatever the current product is, if that product gets updated, that would get reflected, thus ripping them out of the workflow when they actually complete the upgrade, right? And it's important for all this stuff to be connected, because the last thing you want is your real-time data about what product your customer is actually paying for and the marketing messaging that marketing messaging you're sending them. You don't want that to be detached. You want to make sure the messaging matches the current status of what they're buying. I shouldn't be saying, hey, dude, go upgrade to this thing when you already have. That's a really bad look, right? So again, when it's all in the CRM and you have all that data, not only do the triggers to start that kind of conversation around an upgrade are available, but the exact time of when you should shut the up and stop making that message to them, or stop sending that message to them, are there as well. And you can easily make sure you're not like over communicating something or telling them to do something they've already done.
That was excellent timing. Did you do that on your own?
Oh yeah, I got the little right here. I can.
God. Wow.
I want whatever I'm feeling.
I'm like,
yeah. I just got a swear button, man. That's all. But yeah, does that make sense? It's just, again, we're looking at one property here. Like we're looking at objects getting created, what product they're for, and then what their status is. And there's a million things you can do from it.
I think that now we're opening up a door for a conversation, and we're going to come back to the subscription properties and how they help to supercharge everything. But I think now is an appropriate time to talk a little bit about less is more, because I can't tell you how many instances I get into, and everyone wants to have everything so intricate. Mm-hmm. And even if we take us like multiple steps back and look at an organization that is only in HubSpot, they're not using Stripe, they're not using any type of third-party software, and they want to be able to say, deal is closed won. How do we do win-backs? How do we do upsells? And at a very fundamental level, when we start looking at even just native properties in HubSpot, it seems like there's so much that could be done with the native, let alone what happens when you start to expand. And you've seen both sides of the equation. How do you recommend that companies can maybe take a step back, look at their tech stack or look at their properties and start to consolidate rather than, ooh, yeah, let's keep building on this?
Sure. Yeah. That's a good question. The thing is I think that really comes down to how do you sell? Because there's some situations where it's like, we can do certain things in a smarter way with what we have, but if we sell in a certain way, there's fundamental data missing for us to be able to do that, right? So like when you think of doing these like upsell campaigns, if you sell off of a subscription, you got to know the status of that subscription to see if any of that stuff is appropriate, right? If you don't, and you just know what people currently own as like a product, that's much easier to do without subscription data, right? Like you can do that. It really just depends on like How much does it matter in terms of knowing when people have paid for something or if they owe you money? And does that actually factor into the equation, right? Starting to think about transactions as something separate than like a subscription itself. But I'd say if you're not selling off of a subscription model, right, and you want to be able to find ways to like surface upsell opportunities and things like that, a lot of that's going to be looking at closed deals, line items associated to closed deals, getting really smart with how you're doing like product level reporting inside of HubSpot, right? Being able to like tag customers as like certain customer types, right? So like when, having automation that says, okay, let's say you sell B2B, right? If company has a deal closed with a certain product, is there a way that we can simply just like tag that customer as like has bought X, right? And putting that directly on the company record. So we have to do less like layers of filtering through multiple objects to find that out, right? So for example, if you've got like a couple of simple product lines that you sell, right, and you're selling those through deals and you're using line items and you're doing that whole thing, right? That's great. You can do that. But do you have some sort of automation that is then going to go back and like tag that company or tag that contact to say, hey, these people have bought this thing before, right? So that way, for my marketers, when I need to allow them or enable them to be able to just create simple lists, right? To do like an upsell campaign. And they just want to be like, listen, I don't want to like make lists that say, does a contact relate to a deal that has a line item of a specific type, right? Can I just give me a list of contacts that I know have bought this thing, have bought this thing, have bought this thing? And can I create simple filters powered by automation when that happens? So I don't have to create these varying levels or increasing levels of complexity for my marketers who just want to answer a simple question of, how do I just know who's bought this thing, right? So I'd say that's one thing that you could do there. But again, it really depends on how you sell. Are you selling like one-time sales? Are you doing subscription stuff, right? Because when you add the subscription element into it, that's where it gets a lot more complicated and nuanced, because these people are continuously paying you money every month for something, right? And then you're going back to them saying, hey, I want more, or hey, how's it going with that current thing you own? And if you don't know if they're still paying for it, if they've canceled, if they've already upgraded, all of a sudden you're introducing these really awkward situations where miscommunications can lead to bad outcomes, right? Whether it's either you send them an NPS survey after they've already canceled and you're just like, wow, you guys don't know what you're doing. You don't even know that I don't sell your product anymore, right? Or you go ahead and send that upsell email to them when they've already upselled to something and you're trying to sell them like a lower tier of what they have. And they're like, what are you doing, right? Does it necessarily hurt you? No. Does it make that customer look at you in a little dimmer light, if you will, because like you're clearly not using their data effectively and you're miscommunicating to them in like ways that are very clearly avoidable? Yeah. And does eroding that little bit of customer trust over time because you're clearly not using their data properly hurt you in the long run? Probably, right? Especially if something else bad happens, like a customer service issue or something like that. I love how my light turned red accidentally because I whacked it with my finger.
Feels the emotion.
Yeah. So I would say it's, do more with less, in that I'd say the do more with less lesson when it comes to subscription data is try to think how creative you can be with some of the simpler bits of data that you get. So subscription status from a Stripe subscription, man, just that changing means you can do so much with that one little bit of data, right? Just knowing what the product is, so much with that one little bit of data. You don't got to go too much deeper than that, right? I'm sure there's situations where you will, right? But always try to see like how creative can I get with some of the simpler pieces of data that mark a big shift in how someone's interacting with this object, this entity, whatever it may be.
Yeah. I have a question. I'm going to throw a wrench in the works here. We talked about the subscription object and if they've paid as a trigger or not. Mm-hmm. Where does this thing better from, let's say, a SaaS perspective or that kind of world, where does usage come into that? And I can just relate from experience. I was tasked at a previous role with getting product usage data into HubSpot. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And we were in a situation where the dev team was not going to even put a pixel on the product.
Yep.
Whatever kind of tools there were available wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And I ended up having to use SQL and a reverse ETL and custom object and native object and all these things, and got it working.
Yeah.
But it was critical because that was how we tracked if somebody had been onboarded or was activated or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I haven't had to do a similar project in the last 2 or 3 years, but
yep.
Do you take that into account?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. So here's the beauty of, and I'm gonna shill Zebra for a second here, right? One of the best reasons why I think you would like to use, if you're using Stripe at least, why the Zebra subscription object wins over the regular subscription object in HubSpot for HubSpot payments and like Commerce Hub and stuff like that, is that a Zebra subscription object is a custom object just like anything else, which means you could do a lot of cool things like custom properties, which allow you to do some really great stuff, but you can interact with it through the API, just like any other custom object through the custom objects API, right? So what that would open you up to do in situations like that, where you want to track usage, right, is building custom properties on that Zebra subscription object that's representing that actual subscription that's being paid for by somebody, right? You could easily have your third-party database of all like important usage events or usage data pass information onto that corresponding subscription record in HubSpot. The question is, why? Right? HubSpot's not Mixpanel, right? It's not meant to be a tool that is for measuring product usage. However, there are certain things that happen that are product usage that you would want to know as a marketer or as a salesperson or as a service person, right? So the key in those situations is saying, okay, I don't have to know every single time Johnny goes and builds a report in our tool. I don't need to know every single time Sally goes in there and creates a new doodad, or I don't need to know every single time someone goes in and does this esoteric thing inside of our app. That's for Mixpanel. That's for the devs and engineers to figure out how people are using our product, right? Because they're not going into HubSpot to get insights on like, how's people's mouse moving around this page and how can we optimize it? They're not doing that. However, there's a lot of things that someone might do in their product that marketing may want to keep track of in terms of triggering certain things off of it, right? Like you do an important thing in your app, right? And you want to trigger an email to go to that person, right? Or you want to notify whoever their customer success manager is that, hey, Jimmy referred a friend or did something, right? Or you want to measure the impact that your marketing efforts had in order to inspire or encourage someone to use a new feature or to upgrade a thing or to log back in, right? So a couple different ways that you can do this, right? If it's just, hey, I want to see if someone's accomplished like a thing and it's really only going to happen like one time, and it's more important for me to understand from a usage perspective that it happened, but not how many times has it happened. You could easily just do a custom property that says like completed initial onboarding, right? And have that just be a property that's yes or no. And then have an API call from your product into HubSpot's custom objects API to go and take that little property and flick it to yes. That's one way you could do it, right? If that's what you want to be able to do. And maybe you measure that in reporting, or like you use it to trigger off of like a next round of nurturing emails to upgrade or whatever it may be, right? There's that. But then I think the better way of doing it is HubSpot's custom behavioral events, right? That is the sort of gold standard when it comes to seeing when important, cool things happen inside of your product, right? The ways that you can do that is when you're building custom behavioral events, right? And it used to be just behavioral events, but now there's custom behavioral events, right? The big difference with like behavioral events, the idea is that you could create this event and then have your app talk to HubSpot through the API and said, hey, this contact completed this event, right? Whether it was like they logged in or they completed their onboarding, or I don't know, let's say like you're a graphic design piece of software and someone like created a new file or something, right? Like you could tell HubSpot every time that contact did that thing you were looking for, right? And that behavioral event would go, oh, it happened. And this person did it. And they did it at this time, right? With custom behavioral events, what's even cooler is that you can do the same thing, only it has properties, right? Because not every event is created equal, right? I could log in, but maybe I want to know I logged in on what type of device, on what type of browser, right? I logged in, what authentication method did I use? Or like whatever it may be, right? I went and I created a file in this app. What was the template that I used? Did I share it with anybody? Was I using X device? Whatever, right? So custom behavioral events will help you bring in that information. Now, I can't remember. I know custom behavioral events, you could associate them more to things than just contacts. I can't remember if you could associate them to custom objects. You might be. Well, we can literally find out. Let's see. Sorry, I don't want to derail us here, but if I were to go into my personal portal here and we took a peek at custom behavioral
You feel
events,
free to share your screen.
Yeah, and we created one. Hold on, send via API. Yeah, it just looks like it's companies, contacts, deals, and tickets. So it'd be something you'd be doing off of like a contact record. But again, the contact record is really representing like the user in that space. So it makes sense to usually always apply to a contact record, even though you could do it to others. I don't know if I have any custom objects in there, so maybe you can, maybe you can't. I could see a world where you'd want to associate custom behavioral events to a custom object, such as a subscription, right? But you got to remember that subscription object is always associated back to that contact if you're doing it correctly, right? Zebra does that automatically, things like that. But
we associated to a custom object that we called account.
Yep.
Yeah, for what I don't think the subscription object existed, and contact wasn't quite relevant because we wanted to roll it up to the larger
you're
account.
looking at the account level.
And one company could have multiple accounts because if you tried it for a trial, so it became like really, this goes back to the idea of the complexity and how many objects it interacts with, how complicated things can get.
Totally. And it's also too, it's like frequency and like how you want to measure it, right? It's just, there's some things again, where it's like, I just want to know if it happened once and we're good, or I want to know, is this happening more because of efforts that we're making as marketers? If you look at HubSpot's new, what is it called? The customer journey analytics. That shit is like the best friend ever for custom behavioral events, because those custom behavioral events, which could be measuring a action someone takes in your app, right? Those can be measured as steps. So it's like crazy now is HubSpot marketers live in a world where you could literally say, okay, this new feature came out. We want to send an email to all of the users, right? And you can hopefully, if you're managing your subscription or your license data well in HubSpot, you can easily get a list of those people, right? But we're in a world now where you can make a report that literally says, here's all the current users you sent the email to. Here's how many people opened it. Here's how many people clicked the link. And here's how many people logged into your app. And here's how many people took that desired action you wanted them to take. You could literally track all that stuff visually in a really awesome Sankey chart these days, right? And that's something that would have been impossible in HubSpot 3-4 years ago, right? So it's really cool to see how getting all your data into CRM in a very smart, not chaotic, but controlled and educated way can really help you do a lot of this reporting stuff that actually shows you, is your work paying off, right? All this hard work you're doing with content and inbound and all this stuff, is it actually having an impact, the desired impact that you're looking for? And when it comes to like your app stuff, we're in the golden age of that stuff. So it's cool.
Mark, anything you want to expand on there?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, there's so much good stuff there. And I think it's like things are changing so quickly that I assume when HubSpot made their CRM, and certainly when Salesforce made theirs, none of this was really even on anyone's radar about how things would look. It's like we shifted to this subscription economy, but even that was like pretty standardized. And now we've gone so much further than that. And I just wonder, I think the lesson that I continually take from this is that whatever we think is a good idea today, we have no idea what the kind of standard is going to be tomorrow. Yeah. And that there's a certain level of humility in like building these internal processes that like is required to understand that like things can change, and you just have to, it needs to be baked into the whole thing that, you know, this is not super glue.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also people need to think about what can you do to set yourself up for success, to experiment and find out as fast as possible if these are good ideas and if they're not. Right? Because the thing is, if you're not putting yourself in a place where you can easily test a lot of these theories, test what you're seeing people talk about on LinkedIn, test all the crazy shit Max is saying about subscriptions, right? If you're not putting yourself in that situation, figure it out, and just relying on other people to tell you if it worked or not, you're never going to figure it out, because everyone's audience is different. Everyone's product's different. what one guru says versus what another is either going to work for you or not work for you, because everyone's business is different. And the skill of all the marketers and the operators and everyone touching every single part of the flywheel is going to be different too as well. So it's put yourself in a position where like you have the ability to at least experiment with it and don't either just write things off completely or go all in on strategies without any sort of like backup plan either. But there's a lot of stuff you could do. The question is it even possible to test it out? Right.
Yeah, I have so many like floating experiments of things in Google Sheets that are pulling APIs from different places that are like, I haven't quite figured out how I pitch it internally to do something.
Something's there, right?
Yeah, there's something here, and I don't know who or how to test it out.
Just
but
let me
I have 100 of those.
Let me cook. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No.
When it comes to subscription data, it clearly touches every facet of the business: sales, service, marketing. One thing that I feel like doesn't get enough attention, because we could sit here and talk about using subscription data to calculate commissions, doing upsells. We touched on renewals. We talked about MR briefly, which is the golden child for subscription data. Let's talk a little bit about service, because I feel like service is like the redheaded stepchild of pretty much any business. And
does it feel weird for you to say that?
It does. Inaccurate statement, though. Did it sound as weird as it came out?
Sounded good to me.
But right, like when it comes to service, and often they're not seen as a revenue generating business, although we could argue that maybe that's where winbacks should sit and give it service and change someone's opinion. But
it's the revenue keeping function. Are you kidding me?
That's exactly.
Never mind. We could do a whole episode.
It's how you expand.
Yeah.
It's how you expand, right? You generate revenue, you generate MRR, but they're not going to upgrade and increase, or if they want to leave, they're not going to come back because of sales.
Yeah. They're also the one selling the entire year before the renewal happens, if you really think about it, right? And then sales is coming in and just cashing that check. I'm gonna get emails about that. But if you think about it, that's the one. The service folks are the ones saying, hey, let me prove to you throughout this year that you should buy this thing again, right? And they get no credit for it. So crazy. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off, Cameron.
No, I mean, to that point, when it comes to using subscription data for sales, we've had some points on here for NPS surveys, but just go ahead and give a high level overview on some of the touchstone use cases for sales.
Totally.
Or service.
Yeah, for service. So that's the other piece. Again, because people are thinking of like MRR, right? And listen, for companies out there that use Stripe for their subscription stuff, HubSpot sales folks out there trying to make a compelling case for Service Hub when you come across a company like a SaaS company or some other company doing some MRR stuff with Stripe, whatever it may be, or if you're a HubSpot partner and you're looking for a compelling reason that your company that uses Stripe that you're working with maybe has a growth suite because it was sold to them for financial reasons. If you're looking for them to get more out of it, look no further than Service Hub, right? Because when you have your subscription data, there's a ton of stuff that you do in Service Hub that can be completely dependent on it, right? Think about things like your knowledge base, for example, right? If you have, what is it? I think it's like Marketing Hub Enterprise or like CMS Enterprise, either way, private content, right? Like membership-based content. You could easily build a list of contacts who have active subscriptions of your product and use that as the gate that gets people access to things like support through your customer portal, right? Or access to your knowledge base if you're one of those companies that likes to hide your knowledge base behind a customer all, which I don't necessarily recommend. But if there's sensitive stuff in there you only want customers seeing, right? Maybe you hide some of it behind like a wall where only paid customers can access it, right? Again, those lists that power membership for those things can all be powered by the current subscription status of those contacts, right? Are they paying you? Are you not? They're on the list or they're not, right? So that's just one thing, right? And it's important to touch that because your knowledge base is like the heat shield for your actual humans working support, right? You want to be able to make sure that can help people self-serve as much as possible and heat shield all those like easy questions. You don't want to be telling people how to reset their password for the fourth time that day. You just want an article doing that, right? However, when people do actually start interacting with your support team, you can easily use subscription data to figure out how your like triaging the urgency and priority of your tickets, right? Based on a product someone has, maybe they get certain levels of support. Maybe they get routed to specific teams depending on the product that they have, right? If they're past due, maybe you're sending a ping to a support person to reach out to them to say, hey, do you need help updating your payment information? So there's all these ways that you can make services life a little bit easier by doing that. Even think about surveys. We mentioned it earlier, right? If you're doing something like a net promoter score survey, we've all gotten the awkward, hey, how are we doing, like, survey email from a company that we're no longer doing business with. And you're just like, I'm doing terrible, 0. And you're tanking their scores over there because you're just trying to get back at them for sending you an irrelevant survey and wasting your day, right? Or you were mad and you left the product, right? Why are we sending NPS surveys to people who canceled on us, right? We should be sending more thoughtful feedback surveys to actually figure out why, right? Not, are you going to recommend it to someone? Obviously not. You just canceled, right? Or I don't know. Maybe you would if you canceled for a reason that wasn't bad. But anyway, the NPS surveys in HubSpot have a very specific function where you can automate sending them out on a time-based cadence, right? So you can say, oh, every 30 or 60 or 90 days, we want to send out that NPS survey, right? But usually what you have to do is compile a list of customers, right? And what most people are doing these days, unfortunately, is just compiling that list off of people who have a closed won deal. Guess what? If you sell subscriptions, there's a chance that those people aren't customers anymore because they canceled. So instead of saying, hey, we're going to build this list where, you know, that is permanent because one thing happened at one point in time, i.e. they bought from us once, right? Instead of doing that, why don't we target the people who are actually currently paying us for a service, right? And that's really important to do if you are a subscription-based company, because if they ain't paying you, they ain't a customer anymore, right? I mean, sure, they're probably like they were a customer, right? But you're not an active customer anymore, right? So you may not want to be sending those NPS surveys to them, right? So again, just like another way you can use that data, I think another thing that's like interesting is I've seen a lot of people try to do like customer health scores, or, and I don't know if the word, like, I don't know how you guys have heard it. It's probably been said a million times, but like using lead scoring to be able to figure out customer health or some sort of scoring property or some algorithm or like whatever. Hey, people being past due on their payments or canceling subscriptions can be pretty good data points to be able to inform whatever that formula is, or that lead scoring criteria, or like whatever it may, or scoring criteria that you're using, right? There's that. Notifying teams of cancellations, kicking off onboarding when people buy your shit. It's, dude, if we can tell exactly when someone drops money with us, especially if we have a touchless sales process, right? Or one of the statuses that you get from Stripe when you have a new subscription is called trialing, right? If we could identify the people that are currently trialing our product, maybe we could do a little bit of a direct reach out from service or sales to say, hey, you need any help figuring it out, right? Maybe it's better for them to talk to them than sales right away, right? A lot of different things you can do to inform folks.
So I have a question, only because I know we talked a good amount about how Stripe and naturally Zebra interplay with a lot of this. What about for HubSpot users who don't use Stripe? Principles are the same?
I say, so what I would say, for if you're not using Stripe, right? Like you've got some other payment system out there that you're building on that isn't Stripe, and you can't use HubSpot payments. If you're, I would say, for us, try HubSpot payments, right? Get that subscription object working for you if you can, right? But if you're on a different platform, I'd highly recommend doing a couple of things. One, a custom object for subscription, simply so you can just detach the entity of a subscription itself from the thing that owns it, the thing that represents it being sold, the company that person works at, right? Because it's not the same thing. That's the fundamental lesson, right? Get it as a separate entity, right? Even if you are doing it manually, maybe you don't have it tied into another system through your API. You could still create a custom object and update that shit manually or through spreadsheets or whatever, right? You don't need the API to do it. The important thing from a reporting perspective is that it's its own separate thing, right? So that's the first thing I would do. The other idea is, I would say, have some sort of thing that represents actual payments, because a payment to the subscription is also a separate thing than the subscription itself, right? So like you could easily do a subscription object, and you could do a transaction object just like Zebra does with Stripe, right? But what's cool about that is I can then look at that subscription object and I can see a record of payments made to it, right? And if you're doing like really cool stuff, such as you're doing some of that central panel customization where you can show single object reports that are associated to that record, right? You can start to do some really neat things around saying, okay, I've got a contact. I can see their subscriptions. I can click into the subscription. And then on that subscription, I can see who owns it. And I can see reports of payments made over time, right? And like you're breaking these things out into like separate things because they are separate things, but then associating them back together in smart ways so you can hunt things down as you need to. And more importantly, report and automate and segment stuff based on that, right? Any data you have in HubSpot, right? Whether it's an object or it's a property, it has to have some sort of way to improve the way that you report, automate, and segment stuff. Because that's like 90% of the work that you do in HubSpot, reporting, automation, segmentation, right? And so the question is like, are you setting yourself up for success to be able to do that? And a lot of that comes down to your data structure, right? So for the folks that aren't using Stripe and HubSpot payments ain't going to work for you, I'd say one, try to get on Stripe, right? Because you're going to save yourself a whole lot of time. But there are people that can't do that either, right? It's either going to come down to build the architecture yourself, but just make sure the things that aren't other things are represented as their own things and have their own attributes and have smart ways to associate with the stuff that they are associate that tells a story, right? That's like the best thing you can do. So again, anyone out there who's not on Stripe, yo, book some time with me and talk, and I'll show you how we do it with Zebra. And then you can go and copy that same playbook and go do it with some system that's not Stripe or third party or like whatever, right? As long as you have the developers to put it all together. That's the important piece. But yeah, man.
Who's up for another 3.5 hours digging into this?
I'll have to get some more coffee in me before we do that.
Yeah, I definitely think that we'll have to have you back on for another episode, Max, because this was awesome. This was super, super insightful. And I know that obviously there's a lot of space for you to continue to dig in. And I know that you have a lot of apps that do a lot of different things for HubSpot. So I just want to give you the floor to take a moment to offer any last minute advice or thoughts to individuals that would definitely benefit from chatting with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if you're a HubSpot partner, I want to talk to you. We have this awesome partner program that we're building where we just want to make sure that like your team is well equipped and understand all these different apps that you have in your toolbox to get your customers out of sticky situations. DM me on LinkedIn. I'll send you my calendar link. We can book some time to talk about the Happily Partner Program. We pay commission. If you have, if you're telling people to use our apps and they're paying for them, like you deserve commission on that, bar none. But like another thing that we're trying to do, especially with Zebra, is we're trying to help partners actually build services that they can go to market with and sell to HubSpot customers that use Stripe, right? Because our integration just puts the data in there, but then they need skilled HubSpot operators to go in there and actually build the reporting, build the automation, build the segmentation, drive a strategy behind it. And we want to help partners do that and be enabled to do that. So beyond that, we've got like a bunch of different apps that just solve a lot of headaches that I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast is familiar with using HubSpot, whether it's like associating objects and workflows using Associate, having a date field that is updated with today's date every single day. That's TikTok today, and you can use that for a million different things. We even have an app called Clone Attack, which will let you clone CRM objects, which is for whatever reason not native HubSpot functionality. And we've got some really cool apps coming out that have to deal with like native event management in HubSpot. We're just building a ton of really cool products on the HubSpot platform. So there's that. And if you're a HubSpotter and you're listening to this, so HubSpot employees, I want to talk to you as well. DM me, book time, let's hang out. I've got a lot of cool stuff I can show you and your team as well, so you guys can solve for your customers a lot better. But that's basically it. And if you're a Stripe customer using HubSpot, check out Zebra, please.
Excellent. Max, you are a wealth of knowledge. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for the convo, guys. I've been needing to get this off my chest. Can you tell?
Absolutely.
Preach it from the mountaintops.
Well, I'm trademarking the whole flummoxed my flywheel thing because I think we found what flummoxes your flywheel.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I'm feeling hella flummoxed right now. I appreciate the time, guys.
Love it. Mark, thank you as always for joining me on here for the Sprocket Pod. For those who have not seen our previous episodes, you can check us out on YouTube. Just type in Sprocket Pod. You'll see it pop up. We are also newly on Spotify, so you can check out the Sprocket Pod episodes and check out previous episodes on Spotify as well. And if you are a HubSpot user or HubSpot admin, check out the HubSpot Admin User Group, HubSpot User Group, hosted by Deanna Goloff and Kyle Jepson. They are rock stars, and you will not regret attending that event. Links to all of the previously mentioned events are in the show notes. Check it out. Thank you very much, everyone. Sprocket on.